So there's a classic cartoon that shows three fish swimming along, and the smallest fish in the front, the caption reads, "There's no justice at all." And the second fish, a little bit bigger, with its mouth open, ready to eat the little fish in front of it, says, "There's some justice." And the biggest fish in the back, with their mouth wide open, ready to eat both the fish, said, "This is justice." And I can't help but imagine the person in a boat above the fish with a big net ready to scoop up all three of the fish, thinking, "This is justice." So I asked you last week, those of you who were here, I asked you a question, I asked you to do some homework, and I asked you to think about if there were one social condition in Tulsa that you could change, what would it be? So I don't know if anybody's brave enough to just shout out that area. I couldn't resist, while you're thinking and wondering if you're brave enough, I couldn't resist bringing in the headlines this morning for those of you who have looked at your paper, because there's plenty of issues right on the covers of the different sections of our paper. Some of the ones that were named in the point last week, actually. So anybody want to shout out an issue?
Better health for seniors to get back on their feet.
Better health for seniors to get back on their feet. Just a couple more. Yeah? Education. Yes, we heard about pie. Education. Yeah, taking funding away from our schools. How about one more? This side? Oh, all on this side. Okay. Homelessness. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. And if each one of you spoke up, that's 3. We would probably hear 100 more different issues. I want to share with you some of the ones that I've heard just recently from some members of our congregation. There's so much research about children learning better when their basic needs are met, so connected to education. This is from a teacher. "I can do my work better if circumstances can be improved for my students whose parents are in jail, my students who move monthly, my students who come to school hungry, or who are in foster care." Another member, "I'm concerned about my young adult children and their ability to support themselves, their ability to repay their student debt and their parents' debt, their ability to pay for the increasing cost of higher education that they may need to advance in their field, the availability of jobs today and affordable housing. I want my children to be independent, yet I know of many who are moving back with their parents, and I'd like to avoid that." Or from another member, "Now that I'm not driving anymore, I have to depend on friends to take me places, even to All Souls. I wish Tulsa had better public transportation. And I worry about affording health care as I age and whether I'll ever be able to retire." We each have a story, and every story matters as we do this work of finding our shared concerns here in Tulsa and in Oklahoma City, where this work has already begun and is just a little bit further along than ours. This work of the Industrial Areas Foundation. So before I go any further, I just want to talk about that name, because when you say that, Industrial Areas Foundation, most people look a little confused, a little disappointed. It's not a very catchy or appealing name. So the name, though, does reflect the roots of this organization in the labor movement in this country and its long history, 7 successful decades of experience winning tough battles across the nation, from school reform in Texas to green job creation in Seattle. Now, if that sounds like a partisan or a liberal agenda, it isn't. William F. Buckley Jr., a leading voice of thoughtful conservatism back in the day. Remember when we had thoughtful conservatives? Those are the days. He praised Saul David Alinsky, IAF's key founder, when he described IAF practice as organizational near genius. So the IAF is the nation's largest network of local faith and community-based organizations focused on 3 things: developing citizen leadership, building relationships across traditional boundaries, and achieving lasting change. The issues each local chapter, so us in Tulsa, we in Tulsa here take on, emerge from the listening circles we're about to begin. And each local chapter chooses its own name, so we're not stuck with IAF. And the group in Oklahoma City named their group Voice, so their Voice Oklahoma City. Here's another voice from within our congregation. I didn't really think I had any issues the first time I was asked. But doing the work has helped me understand that we all do have challenges, once we consider what we worry about. I also realize that admitting what stresses us doesn't always mean we're saying we can't handle it, or that we don't believe things will work out. But knowing we aren't alone can go a long way toward helping us feel better, even if it isn't an issue we choose to actively work on right now. So just to give you a taste, I want to share a few names of groups across the country. There's the Valley Interfaith Project in Phoenix, the Washington Interfaith Network in DC, Working Together Jackson in Mississippi, Together Baton Rouge, it's obvious where that one is, COPS, Communities Organized for Public Service in San Antonio, Texas. So I share some of the concerns we've already heard about. Healthcare is one, and I've traveled to our capital to do some advocacy work. And the goal of one of my visits was to encourage all legislators to accept federal funding so that we could expand Medicaid service in our state. I see some nodding of heads. So I was really interested when I found this story. Together, Louisiana wins big. Governor signs Medicaid expansion. On his first full day in office, newly elected Governor John Bel Edwards made good on a pledge to Together Louisiana to expand Medicaid. The expansion is expected to provide health care to an additional 300,000 Louisiana residents within the next few months. Edwards signed the executive order for this expansion, flanked by Together Louisiana members. So I wonder, as you think about your own lives, and your children's lives, and your grandchildren's lives. I wonder when you were naming the issues, the people who dared to name, or when you were imagining what issues you would hope we would take on, what the top 5 issues might be for us. A group will often take on a handful of issues. Voice Oklahoma decided to take on education, criminal justice, and economic justice. And groups in some state joined together, as they did in Louisiana. Right now, Voice in Oklahoma City is taking a serious look at public safety issues, at how strained our criminal justice system is, and at the dramatically expanding system of fines and fees being placed on those who have been incarcerated. Believe it or not, people who are in prison and jail are being taxed, basically asked to pay back into the system. Through an ongoing listening campaign in Oklahoma City, they've been hearing about harsh conditions in the penal system for both employees and those incarcerated. So I know many of you already know, but maybe there's a few people who don't know, and it's wonderful if we have a judge in the back of our sanctuary with us this morning. Oklahoma has consistently ranked first in the rate of female incarceration nationally. That's a quote taken from our annual reports written by our own Department of Corrections. And Oklahoma actually incarcerates women at double the national rate. So I have a question for the women in the sanctuary this morning. Are we really that much more dangerous than the women in the rest of this country? Terry doesn't think so. Are we? No, we are not. The fact is that Oklahoma penalizes women much more harshly than other states in our country. And if you add racial justice to this issue, I just have a few statistics here. Black people make up only 7.7% of the entire population, but 20% of the women's prison population is African American. And you could go on and on. I'm not going to give you all those numbers. So our criminal justice system may not emerge. It's important to understand, if you participate in these listening circles, the issues you name may not be the issues that we decide to take on. But I am curious this morning, and I think it's important to learn from each other, how many of us have been directly impacted by crime. So I'm not asking which side of the bars you were on or what happened, but would you raise your hands and just think, have you been personally impacted by crime? And look around, because that's a lot of hands. So I personally have been impacted by crime. I've been robbed 3 times since living here. That's 5.5 years. We've had a church staff person here murdered by her son who was suffering from a mental illness. Mental illness was one of those headlines related to a crime story in the paper today. And I've made visits to the county jail on several occasions, visiting relatives of members. Yes, members of All Souls. So whether or not we decide to work to reform a system that incarcerates more women than any other country in the world, and you can include South Africa, Iran, North Korea, Russia, any country you want, I do want to lift up this morning 2 different concepts of justice: restorative justice and retributive justice. Restorative versus retributive. Most of what we do with our laws and prisons and most of what we watch on those crime shows on television is concerned with retributive justice, with getting revenge, with punishing people for violating laws and our trust, a trust upon which we do depend to live together in society. I don't know if any of you saw Revenant. Have anybody of you seen the Leo DiCaprio movie, Revenant? That whole movie is 2.5 hours of Leonardo DiCaprio crawling around on the ground, moaning and groaning and trying to get revenge. And I don't think he deserved any kind of award for that. Restorative justice, on the other hand, focuses on renewal and safety, restoring right relationships, reweaving, strengthening the fabric of society that is torn apart when crimes are committed. So for the community, retributive justice focuses on renewal and safety. And for victims, it focuses on support and healing. And for offenders, it focuses on accountability and reintegration. I first heard about restorative justice through my work in the Maine State prison system with something called the Alternatives to Violence Project, AVP, which I'm not going to talk about this morning. Fact is, I've been going in and out of prisons since I was 17. I'm going to let you sit with that. As a young mom, I got some training from the Department of Corrections in Maine and got a program for juvenile first offenders started in the area where I lived. And we trained people like you to participate in something that's called a community resolution team, which means that instead of going through the slow and very impersonal and often very not satisfying court system, because it's so slow and so impersonal, if the sheriff, the chief of police, and the district attorney agreed, the offender's file would come to me, and then I would set up a team meeting. So I want you to imagine that one of our youth, we have youth here in our church, has committed a misdemeanor, a first misdemeanor. Maybe they've vandalized their school, they've done something in their classroom, they've smashed some computers, they've painted some stuff on the walls. So my job was first, so the file comes to me from the Department of Corrections. My first step was to call the offender, the youth. Floretta, you want to come up here and be our youth? Okay, great. You don't need to say anything, just need to sit here. I would call the youth, the offender, and ask him or her if they were willing to participate in this process rather than go through the criminal justice system. And then my next step would be to call the victim, the principal of the school, maybe the teacher of the school. Dolores, you want to come up here, be the principal? Dolores is going to come and bring this alive for us. So to call the principal, the teacher, maybe the arresting officer, if they'd be willing to participate. And then once I had a yes from the offender and the victims, my next step would be to call some members of the community, 3 or 4 of you who were trained to be part of this circle so that we could practice this restorative justice. And Flo might bring a parent or a sibling or a child or to be support. Okay, so then the process begins. And I, as a facilitator, we always begin with the story of the victim. So the person who suffered the violation would talk about what happened. So the principal might describe their disappointment and the cost to the school and the impact on the teachers and the parents. There's the material damage, but there's the emotional impact, and there are the psychological consequences that the principal has to deal with. The parents who are concerned, the parents who aren't sure, maybe who pull their children out of school, things that you haven't considered. And the teacher would talk about the breach in trust and the loss of the equipment, and on around the circle, everybody naming the impact of this person's actions, how the story was affecting their lives, around to the grandparents and parents and siblings who might talk about their fear or their anger or their disappointment, or even defend their loved one. This is what's happening in my home. This is why my child is raging against the schools right now. Until finally you come around to the offender themselves, who tells the story from their own perspective. This is, after listening, after hearing, this is what happened. This is what was going on in my life. This is why I did what I did. That's one time around the circle. And then you go back around the circle the other way, talking about reparations and restoration and restoring right relationship and rebuilding trust. And this time the youth speaks first and says what they might be able to do to make things right again with the school and with their classmates and with the teachers. I want to help. I want to paint the halls. I want to raise the money to replace the computers. I'm willing to do a presentation to my class and my teacher about what happened and why and what I'll do next time, right? And back around the circle with those constructive, healing ideas about what people can do, from the parents, the children, the community members. I need to hear you address the school assembly and tell me what's possible. All the way around the circle, back to the arresting officer, teachers, principal, bringing the community back together until an actual agreement is written out, signed, and dated. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You can go back to your seats. So that is an example of restorative justice that I've experienced multiple times that's possible. Can you imagine what it would feel like when you imagine your own experiences of being violated or violating someone else? What it would feel like to do justice together in this way? What it would feel like to witness a victim and an offender and their families speaking directly to each other, not through lawyers or reporters or judges. It costs less than our current court system. It's a much more effective deterrent for the offender, and it's a much more powerful way to engage each other in making justice here and now together. Just ask Josh, which is the story I want to leave you with, the story of Josh. Josh started working for us, for my family, when he was about 14 years old. He was tall and blonde and skinny and hardworking, came from a tough family. Alcoholism and depression were normal and were just part of what he grew up with. So we helped him this way and that way over the years. We trusted him so much that when our family went away for a vacation, a holiday vacation, we asked him to house sit for us, pet sit, take care of the plants, and told him he could use our car in an emergency. We went away and came back, and it didn't take long, just a minute or two after we walked through the doors, to notice that something, coming home from vacation 2 weeks later, it didn't take long to notice that something was wrong. I think the first thing I found was a beer bottle under the couch. Just had that funny feeling. We ran upstairs, started looking around. The girls noticed their gift certificates from Christmas were missing. They had left them on top of their beds. I had a little jewelry pouch. I saw that it was gone. My husband's coin collection, things like that. We started noticing. It didn't take too many days to figure out what had happened. Josh had taken our car, not really for an emergency, but he had taken it out on a road trip. And on his way back, he had picked up a couple of hitchhikers. And then he had brought those hitchhikers back to our home. And then he had left them in our home. He had gone to take care of business someplace else. We did press charges, and Josh cooperated fully with the police, and so a few of our belongings were returned to us. But the relationships were broken, and could have been broken forever, except that I knew about restorative justice, except that I knew about this other way of taking responsibility for and doing justice together. And so we sat down and we talked to Josh, and we told him about the impact of his actions on us. And we tossed around ideas and how he might be able to make it better. We didn't throw him out of our family. And he did clean out my car, top to bottom, inside and out. And he wrote all four of us, my girls were younger then, he wrote all four of us these long, beautiful letters about what our relationships meant to him and how he didn't want to lose us and that he was willing to take responsibility. So on Josh's court date, he and I drove together to the courthouse. And when I was called to testify, I testified on his behalf. I explained to the room full of other offenders and victims, lawyers and police officers and judges what Josh had already done to restore right relationships with my family. And the charges were dropped. And then, heading back to my car, I was out in the halls, and a police officer, the halls where retributive justice is the norm, the punishing, vengeful kind of justice. I was out in the hall, and a police officer ran after me to stop me and grabbed me by the shoulders and said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you. I've never seen anything like that. I doubt I'll ever see anything like that again. But at least now I know what's possible." So I almost didn't tell you this story because it makes me out to be a little bit of a hero, and that's not the point. The point is that our voices matter. The point is it's really important for community members to create safe spaces where the truth can be told, because that's how we all heal and move on, by speaking and hearing the truth. For the record, if restorative justice is not one of the 5 issues we take on, I'm going to be okay, because the fact is we will put our time and our energy into the issues that impact us most personally. That's why we need to hear from you. And the possibility that we will be this honest with each other, that we will talk about mental illness and depression and healthcare and income and driving, that we would dare to tell each other the truth about the pressures we're dealing with, and that sharing those truths could lead to collective action in the larger community is so democratic, and it is so religious. It is profoundly religious. Do you remember what Jesus said? "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of these of the least of the brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." For me, and for you, and for you. So a minister once asked his flock this question: if you were arrested for being a Unitarian Universalist, would there be enough evidence to justify your arrest? I'm working as hard as I can so that there will be. What handful of issues will we choose? We don't know. That's up to us and the members of all the other organizations, churches, and synagogues that will be sharing their stories in the month to come. So I hope you will find a card in the back of the pew in front of you, fill it out, turn it in, and share a story with other members of this church and listen to their short stories. What will our name be? We don't know, because that's up to us too. That's up to us, and our name will be announced at a founding convention in November. We are the ones who can influence the future of this city and this state. We are the ones we've been waiting for. This is just one little example. In 2014, Voice Oklahoma City spent months getting feedback from parents, teachers, and community members across the state about the impact of high-stakes testing on teachers, students, and families. And that made it possible to bring together more than 1,000 people to hold the candidates for State Superintendent of Education accountable to their concerns. It works when we lift our voices and come together. It works, and we are the ones on the ground floor of a movement, not a moment, a movement that's cutting across the chasms created by creed and class, by race and religion, with this election circuit or circus or whatever it is going on out there, I am more convinced than ever that it's our voices that will keep the dream alive. Our voices. Because you know what? This is what democracy looks like. And this is what theology looks like. Will you repeat that after me? This is what democracy looks like. You did it right with me. Okay, wait, after me first. Or do you have it? Let's do it all together. You ready? Here, I'm gonna come out here. Okay, you got it already. Ready? This is what democracy looks like, and this is what theology looks like. Amen.
We are your church, and we are proud to be your church, or at least a church that's having a positive impact on your life. I am personally blessed to be your minister, or at least a minister who you're allowing to speak into your life. I hope you'll support our ministry and share your love beyond belief by texting LOVE-BB to 41444 or go to our website. But you can just text LOVE-BB to 41444 and make your gift. It's wonderful. Thank you. Be blessed and be a blessing.